I am Margaret Allen, 50, 8 years old. I have lived long enough to believe that nothing in life could truly surprise me anymore. I lost my husband in a car accident 2 decades ago, and I raised our only son into the kind of man any mother would be proud of. Now, with his wedding only weeks away, I had settled into the quiet rhythm of late middle age. Small meals at my kitchen table, lavender blooming on the porch, the steady comfort of routine. But one small box, handed to me casually by an old friend, would unravel all of that certainty. It came on a sunny afternoon, light streaming through lace curtains and scattering patterns across the floor. I was arranging flowers for the rehearsal dinner when Caroline, my college roommate and lifelong confidante, appeared at my door with a grin. She carried a neatly wrapped package, blue foil glinting under her arm. "For you, Maggie," she said, her voice full of mischief. "A little gift before Daniel's big day. Everyone's doing it now." Inside was a 23andMe DNA kit. I let out a small laugh, more awkward than amused. "Caroline, really. My family's as ordinary as they come. We've been in the States for generations." She waved off my protest. She insisted it would be fun, maybe even provide a quirky story for my toast at the reception. I held the box in my hands, uneasy but curious. That evening I carried it into the kitchen. The overhead light gave everything a sterile glow. I sat at the counter and unfolded the instructions. Just a small vial of saliva, sealed and shipped simple. Harmless. I lifted the tube, hesitated. An unsettling thought surfaced. What if the results told a different story than the one I had always believed? What if there was a name I had never heard before, someone waiting in the shadows of my family tree? I shook my head, scolding myself for paranoia. It was just a novelty. Daniel, my son, was thriving. He had his father's easy smile, his father's lanky frame. Soon he would stand at the altar with a woman who adored him, and I would finally step into the gentle role of grandmother. Nothing could disturb that happiness. At least, that's what I told myself. I pressed my lips to the plastic tube, let the saliva gather and fall. When the cap clicked shut, the sound echoed louder than it should have, like a lock snapping into place. I slipped the sealed envelope across the counter, then sat in silence, my pulse racing in a kitchen that suddenly felt foreign. Through the window, the maple leaves rustled in the late, autumn breeze. I tightened my grip on the envelope, sensing more than knowing that I had just crossed a threshold. Sometimes a gift is not a blessing at all, but a door to truths we are not ready to face. Every morning I found myself drawn to the computer like a teenager waiting for a college acceptance letter. I told myself it was silly, 50, 8 years old, and I was refreshing my inbox as if my life depended on it. But some part of me clung to the anticipation, the possibility that a row of numbers and charts might tell me something about myself that I had never known. At first, the emails were routine. "Your sample has been received." "Your sample is in processing." Each update felt like a breadcrumb leading me deeper into a forest I hadn't realized I'd entered. I checked while the coffee brewed, while dinner simmered, even in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. My son teased me once when he caught me on my laptop at dawn. "Mom," he laughed, "you look like a kid waiting for Christmas morning." When the message finally arrived, the subject line was ordinary enough. "Your DNA results are ready." My pulse leapt. I clicked before I could think, before I could brace myself. The first page was harmless, almost playful, percentages of ancestry, bright graphics in pie slices of color, Irish, English, a trace of something Scandinavian. I smiled despite myself, thinking of my grandmother's stories about Viking ships. For a moment, it was exactly what Caroline had promised: fun, harmless, curious. Then I clicked on DNA relatives. The screen shifted, and a new list appeared. At the top, highlighted, was a name I didn't recognize. Next to it, in bold letters, predicted relationship: daughter, half sibling. My hand froze on the mouse. For a second, I thought I had misread. I blinked hard, leaned closer. But the words didn't change. My stomach lurched. Daughter, half sibling. The system couldn't decide, but either way, it meant the same thing. Blood tied me to someone I had never known. I sat very still, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. The kitchen clock ticked too loudly. I thought of Daniel, of the vows he would speak in just a few weeks, of the family he believed was simple and whole. I thought of my late husband, his absence still carved into every corner of my house. And then, unbidden, I thought of the years before we married, of secrets I had buried so deep I had convinced myself they were gone. I wanted to close the laptop, to pretend the email had never come. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from that line of text. It glowed on the screen, unmovable, undeniable. I whispered to myself, as if saying it aloud might undo it, "No, this isn't possible." Yet the data remained, cold and clinical, immune to denial. I pressed a hand to my chest and felt my heart hammering against my ribs. In that moment I understood something I had never wanted to face. Numbers do not lie, and DNA cannot be erased with excuses. Some truths live inside the body, waiting for the right moment to surface. And when they do, no matter how desperately you try, you cannot shove them back down. I clicked on her profile with hands that trembled slightly, the cursor hovering for a long beat before I pressed down. The name meant nothing to me. It wasn't a cousin's child or a family friend I'd forgotten. It was a stranger, and yet the algorithm insisted she was close, far closer than I could understand. The screen loaded slowly, as if stalling, giving me one last chance to look away. Then her picture filled the page. I gasped. The face staring back at me was so familiar it sent a chill down my spine. The curve of her cheekbones, the tilt of her eyes, even the set of her jaw. Every feature pulled me back to a man I once loved with a ferocity that burned. My late husband's face lived in hers. It was like seeing a ghost resurrected in pixels. For a moment I could not breathe. I pushed the chair back and stood, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. My chest felt hollow, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. How could this woman, this stranger, wear the same face I had traced with my fingers countless nights? I leaned in again, studying the details. She was younger, perhaps in her early 30s. Her smile was tentative, as if she wasn't used to posing for photographs. Her eyes, those gray, green eyes, made me sit down again hard, my knees weak. My husband's eyes, Daniel's eyes. I scrolled through the profile, desperate for something that would prove me wrong. Hobbies, occupation, birth year, and then I saw it. Born in 1990. I pressed my palm flat against the counter. That was 5 years before our wedding. 5 years before I put on a white dress and promised to be his only love. My pulse raced so fast I thought I might faint. I had expected surprises. Distant cousins, perhaps an immigrant story tucked into the past. But not this. Not a woman who bore my husband's likeness. Born into a time when he was supposed to have belonged only to me. I closed my eyes and tried to remember those early years with him. The late nights at the law firm. The unexplained absences. He had been charming enough to explain them away, and I had been young enough to believe him. Love makes a fool out of certainty. The truth stared back at me from the screen. This woman was not a curiosity. She was not a quirky anecdote to share over champagne at Daniel's rehearsal dinner. She was blood. And if the sight was right, she was blood that intersected mine in the deepest way possible, either my daughter or my sister. The distinction almost didn't matter. What mattered was the reflection I couldn't ignore. Because in her face I saw him, and in her eyes I saw all the questions I had never dared to ask. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. Sometimes it comes quietly, in the click of a mouse. In the gaze of a stranger who feels more like home than your own reflection. And in that moment I knew the past had been living among us all along, waiting for me to recognize it. Dinner should have been simple. Just the two of us, mother and son, sharing a meal in the quiet rhythm we had kept since his father died. But that night, the fork felt heavy in my hand, and every bite lodged in my throat like gravel. I pushed peas around my plate while Daniel chattered, his voice bright. His eyes lit with a joy I wanted desperately to mirror. He spoke of the ceremony, how the church flowers would mirror the autumn leaves, how the vows would be personal but not too long. He spoke of lineage, of starting his own family, of carrying on the Allen name. Each word was a hammer striking a fragile glass pane inside me. I nodded when appropriate, smiled when he paused for reaction. But the taste of roast chicken turned metallic in my mouth. "You'll sit in the front row, Mom," he said, grinning. "Everyone will see you. You'll be proud." I stared at him, willing my face to hold steady. Proud. Of course I was proud. This boy, no, this man, was the reason I had survived widowhood. The reason I still got out of bed some mornings. His happiness should have been mine, unclouded. Yet as he spoke, my mind drifted back to the profile picture on the screen. The face that carried his father's features so unmistakably. I tried to concentrate on the sound of his voice. He was telling me about the guest list now. How extended family from Ohio would be flying in, how it would be the largest gathering of our bloodline in years. My throat tightened. Our bloodline. What did that even mean anymore? The algorithm had carved a wound through the tree I thought I knew, and now every word about family felt like a lie told aloud. Daniel laughed suddenly, recalling a story from childhood. His eyes crinkled at the corners. That was when it hit me with the force of a blow. Those eyes. Gray, green, flecked with gold, the very same hue that had stared back at me from the stranger's photograph. I dropped my fork, the clatter startling him. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, concern knitting his brow. I forced a smile, swallowing back panic. "Just tired," I murmured, waving him off. But my pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out his next words. Because for the first time, I wasn't sure if I was looking at my son or at the echo of a secret I had never chosen. I excused myself early, leaving my plate half finished. In the hallway mirror, my reflection looked pale, almost unfamiliar. Behind me, Daniel's voice carried from the dining room, still rehearsing the future he believed was waiting for him. I pressed my palm against the cool wall, whispering to no one I have to know. Before this wedding, before his vows, before he builds a life on foundations that may already be cracked, I have to know the truth. Sometimes silence at the dinner table speaks louder than any confession, and in that silence, I understood the clock was already ticking. The house was silent except for the ticking clock in the hallway. I should have been asleep, resting for the errands and appointments the wedding demanded of me, but sleep had abandoned me hours earlier. At midnight, I gave up the pretense of rest, padded barefoot into the kitchen, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt illicit, like a candle burning in a locked room. I told myself it was only curiosity, just a few clicks to see what else I could learn about the stranger whose DNA was woven into mine. The 23andMe profile had been sparse, but the internet rarely let anyone remain anonymous. Her name slid easily into the Facebook search bar. Within seconds, a face appeared. Her face, but alive now, not the still snapshot on the genealogy site. She was smiling at a picnic table, her hair caught in sunlight, a child perched on her lap. The resemblance was undeniable. My stomach nodded, but my eyes stayed fixed. I clicked through each photograph, a shard of glass cutting deeper. There she was with friends, with coworkers, with a young boy who looked just like her. She lived less than 20 miles away. My breath caught. She had been so close all this time, living her life parallel to mine. Yet our worlds had never collided. Until now, I don't know what I was searching for. Proof that the algorithm was wrong. Confirmation of the truth I already feared. My fingers moved before my mind could stop them, scrolling through albums stretching back years. And then I froze. In one picture, taken at a family barbecue, she stood with her arm draped casually around a man. He was older, grayer now, but still instantly recognizable. My chest constricted. It wasn't my late husband. It was his father, my former father-in-law. I leaned closer, squinting, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no mistaking him, the square jaw, the way he tilted his head when he smiled. I remembered holidays at his house, the way he poured whiskey too generously, the stories he told about the war. I remembered how he hugged me when my husband died, how his arms felt like pillars holding me up when my world crumbled. But here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with the woman the DNA test insisted was my blood. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to erase the image from existence. But my eyes were rooted to the screen. A possibility I hadn't allowed myself to consider began to take shape, grotesque and undeniable. If she was mine, then she was his too. Or worse, if she was his, then what did that make her to me? My breath came shallow, a wave of nausea rising. The clock chimed one outside. The world carried on as if nothing had changed, but inside, my family tree had just twisted into something I no longer recognized. I shut the laptop with shaking hands. The screen went black, but the image burned behind my eyelids. Sometimes social media is nothing more than idle scrolling, a distraction. But tonight it had become a ledger, a dangerous family record written not in ink but in pixels, waiting for me to decode. And I realized too late the past was never buried. It had only been posted, waiting to be found. I chose the diner because it was neutral ground. Not my kitchen with its memories soaked into the walls, not his office where he always had the upper hand. Just a booth with vinyl seats cracked from years of use, the smell of burnt coffee thick in the air, and the clatter of plates masking the sound of my heartbeat. He was already there when I arrived, hunched over a mug, his shoulders rounded in a way that made him look older than the man I once married. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered the photograph, the DNA results, the sleepless nights since, and pity curdled into resolve. I slid into the booth across from him. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, brittle and thin, like glass about to shatter. The waitress poured me coffee, and when she left, I reached into my bag. The folder felt heavy in my hands. I placed it between us. "What's this?" he asked, his voice low. I didn't answer. I simply opened the folder, pulled out the printed page from 23andMe, and laid it on the table. The paper looked stark under the fluorescent light. Clinical words spelling out a truth I couldn't carry alone anymore. He leaned forward, squinting. His eyes flicked over the words: predicted relationship, daughter half-sibling, a name he didn't recognize, or maybe he did. I watched his face carefully. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. The silence stretched until it pressed against my chest, suffocating. Finally, I broke it. "Say something." My voice trembled despite my effort to keep it steady. He sat back, exhaling through his nose. His hands curled around the mug as if for warmth. When he finally looked up at me, the wariness in his eyes was answer enough. "I have a child," he said quietly. "Another one." The words fell like stones. I had imagined them, feared them, dreaded them, but hearing them aloud was something else entirely. My throat went dry. "With who?" My voice cracked. He shook his head, staring into his coffee as though the answer lay at the bottom of the cup. "It was a long time ago. Before you and I married. I thought it wouldn't touch us." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "It has touched us. It's touching Daniel. It's touching everything." He winced at our son's name, as though hearing it out loud stung. He reached across the table, but I pulled my hands into my lap. "I didn't want you to know," he whispered. "I thought I could protect you from it." "Protect me?" I repeated. My voice rose, drawing a glance from the waitress. "You lied. You built a life on lies and thought silence would shield me." He lowered his head. For once, he had no defense, no smooth explanation. Just a confession that came decades too late. The coffee between us went cold. The paper on the table trembled as the air conditioner kicked on, but the words on it remained. Immutable, unforgiving. A late confession is no salve. It doesn't heal the fracture. It only proves how long the break has been there, waiting to split everything open. Memory is a treacherous thing. It softens the edges of what was unbearable and sharpens what you wish would fade. After his confession at the diner, I found myself lying awake that night, replaying years I thought I had neatly folded away. I was 29 when we married, head over heels for a man who filled every room with his laughter. He worked long hours, or so he told me. Nights at the firm, deadlines that kept him away. I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative was too jagged to hold in my hands. I can still picture those evenings. Me in the small kitchen of our first house, stirring pasta while the clock ticked louder with each passing hour. I would call his office phone, and sometimes he'd answer, voice brisk and tired. Other times, there was only silence and the dial tone. When he came home, he smelled faintly of whiskey and something I could never name. I tucked it away, convincing myself it was stress. The smell of ambition. There were weekends too. Saturdays when he claimed he needed to catch up on briefs. I'd watch him knot his tie, kiss me quickly, and disappear until dusk. I'd sit on the porch, rocking gently, telling myself this was what it meant to be the wife of a man chasing success. That my loneliness was a price we'd both pay now for the comfort we'd enjoy later. But now, with his words still echoing, I have another child. The pieces rearranged themselves with cruel clarity. Those nights weren't filled with paperwork. They were filled with someone else's laughter. Another kitchen, another family. While I washed dishes in our tiny sink, he might have been reading bedtime stories across town. The memory of his tired eyes, the way he loosened his tie when he walked through the door, takes on a different hue now. I used to see devotion in the fact that he came home at all. Now I see only division. His heart split down the middle, his loyalties parceled out like hidden bank accounts. I remember one evening especially. It had rained, and he arrived later than usual, drop still clinging to his coat. I teased him, said he must have been swimming in case files. He laughed too quickly, pressing a kiss to my temple before retreating to the shower. That laugh rings in my ears now, brittle, designed to distract. Looking back is like developing a photograph in a dark room. Details emerged that you couldn't see before. The shadow in the corner, the outline you mistook for something else. Each recollection carries a smear of red across it, proof that the truth was always bleeding through, even when I refused to look. I once thought our history was a love story, messy but enduring. Now I see it for what it was, a mosaic of secrets, each lie cemented into place until the picture no longer resembled the life I believed in. When you turn memory over, it cuts, and when I lifted mine from the box I had hidden them in, I found my hands already stained. I stared at her profile picture on the screen for a long time, the cursor blinking over the empty message box. My fingers hovered, hesitant, as if the act of reaching out might solidify everything I had been trying to keep unreal. Finally, with a breath I couldn't quite catch, I typed a single line, "Hello. I think we might be related." The words felt fragile, like porcelain that could crack with the wrong pressure. I pressed send before I lost my nerve. The message whooshed away, leaving me alone in the glow of the laptop. My heart thudded in my chest, heavy and insistent. I didn't expect a reply so quickly. But less than 5 minutes later, the notification pinged, and there it was, her name lighting up my screen, a sentence forming that made my throat go dry. "I saw you too. You came up in my results." For a moment, I just stared. The kitchen around me blurred, the hum of the refrigerator seemed miles away. This wasn't a glitch or a mix-up. She had seen me, the way I had seen her. Both of us caught in a web spun from double helixes and percentages. I forced myself to type again. "Do you know how?" Her reply came almost instantly. "The site said you could be my half-sibling." Or something even closer. I swallowed hard. My palms were damp. All the denials I'd rehearsed, about science making mistakes, about coincidences in data, crumbled under the weight of her certainty. "Who was your father?" I typed, my hands trembling. There was a pause this time, long enough for my pulse to quicken again. I imagined her on the other end, staring at her own screen, deciding how much to reveal. When her message appeared, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. "I don't know his name. My mother never told me. But the system says we share the same one. That makes us sisters. Sisters through our father." The words glowed on the screen, and I couldn't blink them away. Sisters. The world seemed to contract around that single word. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling the sob that rose in my throat. Sisters. Not a daughter as I had feared, but a sibling. Which meant that the betrayal didn't start with my husband. It began even earlier, rooted in the man I had once called father-in-law. The memory of his laugh, his whiskey-soaked hugs, the way he used to call me kiddo when I first joined the family. Suddenly all of it felt grotesque. Because behind the warmth lay a truth I had never glimpsed. He had planted another branch of the family tree. One no one had acknowledged until now. My hands shook as I shut the laptop, but the words remained etched in my mind. "We are sisters through our father." Sometimes it isn't death that cleaves a family apart. Sometimes it is a message, a single line of text that rewrites the story you thought you belonged to. And once it's written, no amount of silence can erase it. The decision pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Every hour of the day I carried it, folded neatly in the pit of my stomach. Should I tell Daniel what I had learned? That the family he believed in was fractured, that the man he idolized had left shadows where promises should have been. Or should I bury it, let the truth rot quietly in me, never touching his joy? I paced the length of my living room, unable to settle. On the mantel, his graduation photo smiled back at me. He was 22 then, his eyes alight with the certainty of youth. He had always believed in stability, in heritage. In the story I had told him, that he came from a line of men who were flawed but honorable. That belief had been my gift to him. To shatter it now felt like a cruelty I wasn't sure I could stomach. That night I stopped by his apartment, carrying a bag of extra cufflinks I had found in an old drawer. He was in front of the mirror, trying on his wedding suit. The fabric caught the lamplight, deep navy against his lean frame. He turned, his smile boyish, his face alive with a happiness I had not seen in years. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked, arms spread wide. My throat tightened. He looked so much like his father in that moment. The posture, the tilt of his chin, the gleam of expectation in his eyes. But he also looked like the stranger on my computer screen, the one who might share our blood, the one who made me question everything I thought I knew. I forced a smile, clapped my hands. "You look perfect," I said, and my voice nearly cracked. He laughed, turned back to the mirror, adjusting his tie. I can't believe it's happening. A new chapter, you know. His voice softened. You'll walk me down the aisle, right? It'll mean everything to me. That was when the dam inside me broke. Hot tears blurred my vision, and before I could hide them, they were streaming down my cheeks. Mom, he asked, startled, stepping closer. What's wrong? I shook my head, covering my mouth with one trembling hand. How could I explain that it wasn't his future I doubted, but his past? How could I tell him that in the shadows of his family tree lurked a truth that could splinter everything he trusted me to protect? I turned away, unable to let him see the full depth of my grief. In the reflection of the mirror, I caught a glimpse of him standing behind me, confusion etched across his face. I whispered only to myself, a vow I didn't know if I could keep. I must decide whose heart I'm willing to break, his or my own, because love can withstand so many things, distance, loss, even betrayal. But what it cannot survive, I knew with certainty, is silence wrapped around a secret too heavy to contain. The church smelled faintly of polish and lilies, the kind of scent that clings to sanctuaries before weddings. I sat in the second pew, clutching the rehearsal program, trying to still the tremor in my hands. Daniel was at the front, practicing his lines, his fiancée radiant in ivory lace. Everything was unfolding exactly as it should, until the door at the back of the church opened. She stepped inside quietly, almost apologetically, as if unsure she belonged there. The same woman whose face had haunted my computer screen for weeks. The woman I now knew carried my bloodline in some unspeakable way. She wore a simple blue dress that caught the light from the stained glass windows, washing her in jewel tones. My breath hitched. For a moment, no one noticed. Then her gaze swept the room, calm, steady, curious. When her eyes passed over me, I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. Did she recognize me? Or was I just another stranger in a sea of faces? Daniel glanced up from the altar, distracted by the creak of the door. His eyes landed on her, and I watched the air shift. He didn't just look, he stared, his gaze snagging on hers for a second too long, as though he felt something he couldn't name. I gripped the pew, my knuckles white. The urge to stand, to block her view, to shield him from whatever invisible thread had just drawn taut between them, nearly overwhelmed me. But I stayed rooted, my body stone, my heart breaking in silence. The rehearsal continued around us, the bridesmaids practicing their walk, the officiant stumbling through his notes, laughter bubbling here and there. But for me, the room had narrowed to a single line, stretched between my son and the woman in blue. She slipped into a seat near the back, crossing her legs gracefully. I couldn't stop watching her, cataloging every resemblance, the slope of her shoulders, the cadence of her smile when someone whispered hello. Each movement was a reminder of the undeniable truth hiding beneath the surface of this celebration. Daniel turned back to his fiancée eventually, but I noticed how his glance wandered once, twice, back toward the pew where she sat. His expression wasn't recognition exactly, but something close. Like déjà vu. Like standing in a house you swear you've been in before, though you've never crossed its threshold. My throat tightened. This wasn't coincidence. Blood calls to blood, whether we invite it or not. The rehearsal ended with applause, with the clatter of folding programs and the shuffle of shoes against tile. Guests streamed outside into the cool dusk, laughing, planning dinner. But I remained in the pew, my hands clasped, watching her stand and leave. Daniel's head followed her movement instinctively, even if he didn't realize it. There are bonds we spend our lives building, marriage vows, promises made in churches. But then there are the bonds written into us before we are born, threads stitched by biology, invisible yet unbreakable. And in that church, on the eve of my son's wedding, I saw those threads tighten, pulling my family toward a truth none of us were ready to face. The evening air was warm, heavy with the scent of cut grass and late, summer roses planted along the churchyard. After the rehearsal, I wandered outside for a breath of calm, my mind still tangled from seeing her seated in the back pew. The last thing I expected was to hear my son's laughter ringing out across the lawn, carefree, unguarded, the kind of laugh that belonged to childhood more than adulthood. I rounded the corner of the building and stopped short. Daniel was standing beneath the elm tree, his suit jacket draped over one arm, his tie loosened. And there, only a step away, was her, the woman in blue, the one who carried my father-in-law's features, the one whose name had lit up on my DNA results. They were talking easily, as though no introductions were necessary. I watched them from a distance, frozen. As Daniel leaned in slightly, his expression bright, and she threw her head back in a laugh that sounded startlingly familiar. Not the cadence of her voice. I had never heard that before, but the rhythm of it. It was the same way his father used to laugh when something truly delighted him, unrestrained and whole-bodied. The sound pierced me. I wanted to step forward, to break it up before it became something I couldn't contain. But I stood still, gripping the edge of my shawl, watching as the two of them continued in their bubble, oblivious to the weight pressing down on me. Finally, Daniel noticed me. He raised a hand, his face flushed from amusement. "Mom," he called. "Come meet someone." Every part of me screamed to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen, but my legs moved of their own accord. I crossed the grass, the sound of my footsteps too loud in my ears. When I reached them, Daniel's smile was wide. "This is Anna," he said proudly, as though presenting a treasure he had just found. "We just met, but it feels like I've known her forever." The world tilted. My mouth went dry. Anne extended her hand politely, and I forced myself to take it. Her grip was warm, steady. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, something passed between us. Recognition, acknowledgement, a silent agreement that neither of us wanted this moment, but both of us knew it was inevitable. I managed a brittle smile, murmured a greeting. Inside, though, my chest constricted so tightly I thought I might shatter. They continued chatting, filling the air with harmless conversation, but every word landed heavy. I could see it already, the way fate had a cruel sense of humor, placing them in each other's path with all the ease of a casual encounter. I excused myself quickly, citing a headache. As I walked away, the sound of their laughter followed me, chasing me into the dark. Sometimes we believe chance governs the world, who we meet when we collide. But standing in that churchyard, watching my son laugh with the half-sister he didn't yet know he had, I understood the truth. What we call coincidence is often just destiny in disguise, mocking us with its timing. I lasted only a few more hours before the weight inside me became unbearable. Secrets have a way of pressing against the skin, demanding release. That evening, back at the house, Daniel and his fiancée were finalizing details. Flowers delivered, menace confirmed, music cued. Laughter floated through the rooms. But I stood apart, my chest tight, my palms damp. I could no longer carry what I knew. Daniel was bent over the dining table, helping arrange bouquets his bride had ordered for the altar. I watched him lift a cluster of white roses, his fingers gentle, his face full of anticipation. That was the moment I broke. "Daniel," I said sharply, my voice cutting through the laughter. Both he and his fiancée turned startled. I felt the tremor in my hands, but I didn't stop. "I need to tell you something." "Now?" He frowned. "Mom, can it wait? We're in the middle of." "It can't wait." My words were sharp enough to still the room. The bouquet slipped from his fiancée's hands, petals scattering across the floor. I drew a breath that burned my lungs. "That woman you met today, Anna, she's not a friend. She's not someone you just happened to run into." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "She's your sister. Your half-sister. You share a father." Silence crashed over the room like a wave. For a long moment no one moved, no one breathed. Daniel blinked, confusion flashing across his face as though I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "What?" he whispered. The white roses hit the floor with a dull thud. One by one, the petals fell, scattering like snow against the hardwood. His fiancée clapped a hand to her mouth. The sound of her gasp echoed in the heavy quiet. Daniel's eyes searched mine, desperate for denial, for an explanation that would smooth away the jagged edges. But all I had was the truth, and it lay between us like broken glass. "She's the result of a past your father never told you about," I said softly, but the words landed like stones. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but you need to know before you take vows, before you build your future on a foundation of lies." His face went pale, his hands tightening into fists. The petals at his feet looked like a graveyard of promises. Everything he thought he knew scattered beyond repair. For a moment I wished I could pull the words back into my mouth, stitch the secret closed again. But it was too late. Truth, once spoken, does not retreat. Daniel's fiancée bent to gather the flowers, but her hands shook so badly she gave up, sitting heavily in the nearest chair. The silence was thick, suffocating, filled only with the echo of what I had said. A wedding can be postponed, a celebration undone. But truth has no reverse gear. Once it enters the room, it stays. rearranging the furniture of every relationship it touches. And I knew, staring at my son's stricken face, that nothing about this family would ever look the same again. His voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Why didn't you tell me sooner, Mom?" Daniel's face was flushed, his eyes wild with hurt. The boy I had raised, the man about to step into marriage, looked suddenly like a child betrayed. I reached for him, but he pulled back, the distance between us wider than the table that separated us. "I didn't know how," I whispered. "I only learned the truth myself." "That's not enough." He cut me off, his voice trembling. "You let me walk around shaking hands, smiling, talking to her like she was a stranger. You let me look like a fool." The sting of his words burned deeper than I wanted to admit. I had carried the secret like a stone in my chest, convincing myself silence was protection. But seeing him now, broken open, I knew silence had only multiplied the damage. "I think you deserve to hear it from him," I said finally, my throat dry. "From your father." Daniel's brows furrowed. "Dade's gone." "Not your father," I corrected quietly. "Your grandfather, my former father-in-law." Later that night, I sat across from the old man in his den. The room lined with dusty books and photographs of a family that had always looked perfect from the outside. Daniel sat beside me, stiff and silent, his jaw set like stone. The man who had once been a pillar of strength now looked diminished, his frame swallowed by the armchair. He poured himself a drink with shaky hands, but his eyes were clear as they met mine. He knew why we were there. I slid the DNA results across the table, just as I had done with his son days before. "Explain," I said, my voice brittle. He stared at the paper for a long time, then leaned back, exhaling a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of a buried life. "It was decades ago," he said at last. His voice was low, carrying both shame and resignation. "Before your mother, Daniel. Before your father even thought about settling down." Daniel shifted beside me, every muscle in his body coiled. "So it's true," he demanded. "She's my aunt, my sister." "What is she?" His grandfather rubbed his temples. "She's the child of a woman I once loved. It didn't last. I was young, foolish. I thought it would fade away. But clearly, it didn't." The confession landed in the room like a storm, rearranging every memory. I thought of holidays at this very house, of the man who taught Daniel to fish, who told him stories by the fire. That same man had built his legacy on a mission, leaving behind not just property and money, but a fracture carved into the family line. Daniel stood pacing, his hands shaking. "All my life I looked up to you. And you." His voice broke. He turned away, pressing his fist to his mouth. I reached for him, but he stepped beyond my touch. Legacies are not only measured in what is left behind, but in the wounds that echo long after. And in that moment, I realized his grandfather had given Daniel both a name to carry forward and a scar he would never forget. The church, that should have been filled with music and flowers, stood quiet. Guests had been called, vendors postponed, the reception hall left waiting. What was supposed to be Daniel's wedding day had become something else entirely. A pause, a holding of breath. The truth had cracked through us like a fault line, and now we stood at its edge, unsure if the ground beneath would hold. Daniel moved through the house like a storm contained in human form. His tuxedo hung abandoned in the closet. The shoes polished for the occasion sat untouched by the door. His fiancée tried to console him, but his anger had no outlet except the walls, the air, and sometimes me. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," he said, pacing the living room. "Instead, I find out my family tree is a mess of lies." I sat in the corner chair, hands folded, the weight of guilt pressing down. Every word he spoke was a shard of glass cutting us both. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I knew apologies could never fill the crater left by betrayal. Then, in a moment that seemed to rip time itself, Daniel yanked the small velvet box from his pocket. He opened it, stared at the silver band inside, then hurled it across the room. The ring clattered against the hardwood floor, skittering beneath the couch. His fiancée gasped, tears springing to her eyes. "I can't do this," he choked out. "I can't stand there and make vows when everything I thought I knew about my family is a lie." His voice cracked, and for an instant, he looked less like a groom and more like the little boy who used to run to me after nightmares. I held my breath, waiting for his bride to be to crumble, to give up under the weight of secrets that weren't hers. But instead, she stepped forward. With quiet resolve, she bent to retrieve the ring from beneath the couch. She stood, holding it in her palm, and reached for Daniel's hand. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened. "We don't choose the families we're born into. We can't rewrite their mistakes. But we can choose what we build together." Daniel shook his head, but she didn't let go. She pressed the ring into his hand, her fingers firm around his. "We will get through this," she whispered. "Not because it's easy, but because love is supposed to survive the hard things. This is one of them." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Daniel's shoulders sagged, his head bowing into her chest as she held him. His anger melted into sobs, raw and aching. I turned away, tears sliding down my face. In that instant I understood. Vows aren't broken by the truth. They are tested by it, and only the strongest ones endure. Love, real love, doesn't stand untouched by pain. It stands because of it. The landlord pressed the cool metal into my palm with a polite smile, as if he were handing me nothing more consequential than a spare copy. But the weight of the key settled heavy against my skin. It was not just brass and teeth. It was a doorway to a life pared down, a new beginning carved out of necessity rather than choice. The apartment was small, barely 3 rooms stacked above a laundromat, with windows that rattled when trucks passed on the street below. The kitchen counter was worn laminate, the cabinets painted too many times to hide their age. Still, when I turned the lock for the first time and pushed open the door, the emptiness greeted me with something close to relief. No shadows of family dinners, no framed photographs accusing me from the walls, just bare space and silence. I spent the morning setting down boxes, each one a fragment of my old life, a teacup set from my mother, a stack of photo albums I couldn't bear to part with, the picture of Daniel as a toddler in overalls, clutching a toy truck. The walls echoed with every movement, as if reminding me how hollow things had become. By afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I froze, hand still on a box. When I opened it, my daughter-in-law stood there, her eyes red, cheeks streaked with tears, clutching a tissue balled in her fist. "Mom," she whispered, voice breaking. "Please, don't shut us out. I know everything is broken right now, but we can fix it. We need you." For a moment, my resolve cracked. She was the woman who had promised to love my son through everything, who had stood firm when his faith in family faltered. Seeing her cry felt like betrayal of its own kind, as if I were abandoning the only person still fighting for us. She reached for the doorframe, half a step from crossing into the apartment. "Let me in," she pleaded. "Let me make it right." I looked at her. The daughter I had wanted to claim fully, the one tethering my son to a future he still deserved. And yet, behind her eyes, I saw the weight of everything that had unraveled the lies, the confessions, the history none of us had asked for. The apartment was small, and my heart smaller still. There was no room left for ghosts, no space to let the ache of the past flood in again. Gently, I placed my hand against the edge of the door. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "Not now." Her shoulders sagged, her lips parting as if to argue, but she only nodded through tears. I closed the door before either of us could speak again, the latch clicking with finality. I leaned against it, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. The silence that followed was both cruel and comforting. The apartment might be modest, stripped of grandeur, but in its smallness lay something I hadn't felt in years: boundaries. And in that moment I realized, it wasn't the size of the space that mattered. It was the size of the heart that had finally said, enough. The apartment was still unfamiliar, the walls too bare, the furniture arranged in a way that felt temporary, as if I might leave again at any moment. But that night, for the first time, I allowed myself to pause. I lit a candle on the little kitchen table, its flicker throwing shadows against the window. Beside the flame, I placed the one photograph I had carried from the old house, a picture of my husband taken before the accident, his smile full of promises he had never quite kept. I stared at him across the years, my fingers tracing the edge of the frame. So much had been lost, so much undone, yet the habits of love are not easily erased. My voice came out in a whisper, cracked and uneven. "I kept my vow even when you didn't. I raised our son. I stayed when silence was easier. And now, finally, I've kept something for myself." The words surprised me, rising like a prayer. "I've held on long enough. I've kept my freedom." The candle hissed as a drop of wax slid down its side, hardening before it reached the table. I closed my eyes, the weight of grief and release colliding in my chest. For so many years I had lived in the house of someone else's making. First his, then my son's. Always borrowing space, always bending myself to fit. This place, however humble, was the first I had chosen for me. The silence was broken by the sharp trill of the phone. I jumped, the spell of the moment snapping. For a second, I considered letting it ring. But habit pulled me to the receiver. Mrs. Allen. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. "This is First Federal Bank. We wanted to confirm your mortgage paperwork. The deed and loan are now solely under your name." My breath caught. I leaned against the wall, the phone pressed tight to my ear. "Just my name?" I asked, as if repetition could make it real. "Yes, Mom. All records have been updated. You are the only owner of record." A laugh bubbled up in me, unexpected and almost wild. Tears blurred my eyes, but they were not the bitter kind. They were the tears of someone who had been carrying chains and suddenly felt them fall away. After I hung up, I returned to the table, sitting across from the photograph. The candle flame bent in a draft, wavering but steady. I touched the frame one last time. "They changed the locks," I whispered. "But I changed my life." Outside, traffic hummed, anonymous and distant. Inside, the apartment held its quiet, its promise. It might never be grand, never be filled with the noise of family dinners or the chaos of children underfoot. But it was mine. Every square foot, every creak in the floorboards. Every night of peace that stretched ahead. Freedom, I realized, isn't loud. It doesn't arrive in triumph. It arrives in the soft click of a door locking behind you, and the knowledge that finally, the key belongs only to your hand. In the end, what remained was not the house, not the shattered lineage, not even the unanswered questions about who belonged where. What remained was a woman who had lost and loved, who had been betrayed and silenced, and who had finally carved out a corner of freedom for herself. The past cannot be rewritten, but it can be survived, and in survival, there is its own kind of grace. The truth, I learned, is never gentle, but it is the only soil in which new life can take root, and I, at last, have chosen to grow. What would you have done if you were in her place? Protect the secret, or tell the truth no matter the cost? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Telling Story with me, and share it with someone who loves powerful family stories. Your support keeps these voices alive.